She looked at the strange creature that lumbered through the forest floor. It was treading on its hind legs like most beastmen did for a casual walk, but with a gait and proportions that were wrong for any of the kins. Its face was flat and devoid of fur. It didn't have any tail, and its feet looked awfully slim for what looked like an ape. It was also as tall as a gorilla-kin, yet thinner than one. If it was one, it must be dying of starvation, which was a ridiculous thought. No beastman would witness one of his kin dying and do nothing about it. A few gorillas passed by, yet didn't blink an eye to the creature. They continued on their way, as it explored the streets of the forest city she called home. It was quite the strange sight. It was covered in cloth and metal, browsing the wares of merchants and artisans. The creature was clearly some kind of beastman of obscure ancestry, as it was capable of speech and thought. That much was apparent by the way it sometimes stopped to converse with the artisans, or haggle with the merchants. She knew outside the forest, where no plant grew, there were strong materials that were used for tools and equipment. This individual was wearing it, which was an oddity. Oh, she knew of armor, but those used were of the hide and leather of felled wild beasts. No beastman used metal. It was either too restrictive, too heavy, or inefficient. Beastmen used their natural gifts better than artificers. She first saw it when the glint of the sun reflected on its armor down the road out the city. That was the first unordinary thing that happened for a long time. From up in the canopy, sitting on one of the suspended tree bridges that spanned the heights of the forest city, where avians resided, she looked every morning through the city, the path that leads to the lands beyond the forest. How long has it been since she started this habit? Months? Years? She barely remembers why she is waiting there each day. It has long been since the memory faded, yet she feels compelled to do it. In any case, she welcomed this change of pace. She easily followed the creature from the canopy. By flight at times, on the bridges otherwise. As it arrived at the Millennial Oak City Hall, she had an epiphany. There were elves at the City Hall. She never bothered looking for them, but now that she saw what they looked like, she guessed the creature must be an elf too. Though its features were more rough and its ears way too small, it might be a disfigured one. The thought was conflicting. It was both making sense and not. What a mystery, she thought. As the elf and armoured Sylvan entered, she realised it was not close to the elf's race. The elf was graceful, like a swan, and agile like a cat, while the creature had the gracefulness of a bear and the agility of an elephant. She looked over the edge of the top level of the city hall, down in the lobby searching for the strange not-elf. She found it with the elf talking to a worker of a public records desk. She was too far up to hear what was said, but her vision was keen enough to see they wore saddened faces for some reason. They finished by exiting the hall with what looked like farewells. Zipping out to follow, she found them again with an avian that took flight after receiving instructions from the elf. She didn't care for them. She was more curious to see what the not-elf wanted there. Which, by the way the elf pointed to, was not far. It walked in that direction with a wave to the elf, and she followed still from the canopy. Now the creature was periodically looking up to the canopy level of the city, probably looking for the swallow that flew off. Perhaps a messenger that will return with a greeting missive from the recipient. The sightseeing came to an end after a dozen minutes, when the swallow landed a few meters before the stranger. Oddly, instead of handing a response, they spoke. Then they led it to one of the stairway firs linking the 4 city levels together. As evidenced by the bridges and stairways, ground dwellers did go up in the trees, but visitors and strangers always stayed at the trunk level. Hence, a stranger ascending to a branch level was uncommon. One to canopy level was rarer still. So she was excited to witness an event she may never see again, when they climbed past the branch level where the lightest non-avian beastmen dwelled. She wondered which avian the creature went to meet. The one she knew never talked about anyone like this creature, So maybe she'd make friends to know what it was. When they got on the hanging bridges, she made sure to blend in with the passers-by, 1 or 2 bridges back. It wasn't long before she recognized locations. A shop here, a tavern there. Places she frequented. She lived near here. What were the odds? However, as excited as she was, she suddenly froze when she saw which treehouse they arrived at. It wasn't one of those she knew. It wasn't one of those she didn't know either. It was hers. Fear invaded her mind. A stranger on her doorstep brought too many bad memories. What does it want? Why did it come here? Why me? Suspicions rooted in darker history clouded her thoughts. While a myriad of questions roiled in her mind, the creature talked some more with a swallow, gave farewells, then knocked at the door. No one answered. There was no one who could. She was living alone, and she wasn't there. A few minutes after making another knock, he unshouldered his pack and leaned on the wall beside the door, waiting. Since it didn't outright break in, since the house was empty of residents now, she observed the being for a few minutes longer. Officials didn't waste time, so they would have plastered a document to her door for her to read later, but this wasn't an official. As it kept out of the way and stayed quiet, she had to concede it was polite and might not have ill intentions. Unfortunately, she met too many people who appeared this way to her. The best course of action was to let it bore itself enough to leave before she came. Suffice to say, she wasn't stupid enough to meet a stranger she didn't know the motives of. Her curiosity was completely overshadowed by her fears, so it made sense to leave before she gets caught in some unpleasant situation that she could swiftly deal with later. She decided to sleep at the inn for the night. Whatever it wanted, she was sure the being would be gone by morning, but on the morrow, she was surprised to see it still at the door. Had it slept on the porch? She didn't know. She was still too apprehensive to approach. For the next few days, this dance of uncertainty pushed the limits of her patience until she was out of funds. This was the most tenuous stranger she ever saw at her door. So, trying to appear as calm as can be, she approached the stranger. "Excuse me," she said. "What are you doing at my front door?" The elf-like creature turned towards her with a somber look. This, coupled with the difference in height, worried her. She was ready to take flight at any moment. It made an untoward move on her. However, that didn't happen. Instead, it asked, with a clear male voice, "You must be Viridana." She squinted her eyes at him. "What's it to you?" she queried. Taking those words as confirmation, he nodded. "Then I must say this in advance." He paused to prostrate before her. "I am deeply sorry for the grief I bring to your home." This sudden act of submission alarmed Viridana, as onlookers stopped to witness what essentially looked like a servant's deference. Flustered, she ushered the man inside and quickly shut the door. She thanked the gods he didn't resist, or she would have been unable to push his weight, embarrassing her even more. Out of prying eyes, she rested her head against the door while the man looked at her apologetically. This was getting worse and worse. "Why the hell did you do that?" she exclaimed. "Who are you? What do you want?" Her fears were momentarily abated, as she ranted every question she had in anger. "What will my neighbors think?" The armored man sat down to be more comfortable and not look down at her. "Please, calm down, miss. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Trouble?" she parroted back. "You just did. Didn't you see how many avians looked at me, as if I was a noble? I'll never live this down." "And I'm sorry for that, but it needed to be said." "What for?" Sadness took over his features as he hung his head for an instant. She examined the man in front of her. Something in his behavior reminded her of younglings being scolded by their parents. Somehow, it felt like this man was feeling guilty for something. Viridana's anger and fears completely evaporated, as she looked at a man that bore an invisible cross. Every part of this man's body indicated resignation. A man ready for the consequences of his actions. What it was, she didn't know, but she was about to find out. The man fetched his pack to extract objects from it. With all the care in the world, he set an urn in front of him, towards her. The moment the well-decorated porcelain touched the floor, her eyes widened, and her crest fell. She knew this kind of pottery. She saw one like this one a long time ago. Visions flashed in her mind. Images of a young pheasant bee-scale crying to an older one, lifeless in her bed. Of an orphan avian years older, resting in an empty, desolate home. Of a much happier time reading stories of adventure from countless letters. A lone figure without a visage, obscured by the mists of time. She recalled when her mother died, barely a decade old before she could fly. She fought beak and claw to keep the house as a memento of her mother. She worked tirelessly to pay bills and invoices. She did everything to keep the state and guilds from seizing the only place she held dear. Somehow, she succeeded, but she couldn't get a hold of her mother's urn. She was too late before the urn, containing her mother's remains, after her ashes were scattered, free like the wind, was lost to her. Her mother's blessing from beyond kept her safe from the undesirable fate that orphans often face, but it was at the expense of her mother's remains. And now, by some miracle, the lost urn was returned, by a stranger of a race unknown to her. She staggered forward to the porcelain piece and fell to her knees, out of arm's reach, unable to move closer due to the intense emotions that rocked her. Viridana barely heard the man speak again. "There is also this," he said, as he deposited golden and blue feathers beside the urn. Feathers she never saw, but deep down she knew. She reached for them, but once again was unable to close the gap, as if an invisible barrier blocked her. "Your father was a good man," he continued. "He saved my life more times than I can count. He was the best friend I could ever have asked for." The fog in her mind started to lift off the image of her father, once young and ambitious, leaving her and her mother for a life of adventure. With a bright smile and dream-filled eyes, she saw him for the last time, 5 years out the egg. He said that although you may never forgive him, he is sorry that he was never there for his family. He is sorry he was not there in your time of need, and he is deeply sorry he could not fulfill his promise to you. He wishes for you to live a life you are proud of. Viridana's winged arms trembled as tears welled in her eyes. A memory long forgotten surfaced. Her father, kneeling, holding her in his arms, laughing, entertaining her with fabricated stories and grand tales. A promise made in the canopy of the tallest tree under the stars. One which he would go and live the tales he told, and when he'd be strong enough, he'd bring her with him to see the world. Viridana wanted to ask how, to ask why. She wanted to know where was her father, or why was he not here? But the words got stuck in her throat, as sorrow prevented her from anything but trembling uselessly while she fought the tears from flowing. The man continued after a brief pause. "Your father was strong and brave. He was always the first to fly with the help of others. Yet when he needed it, like he saved me..." He paused again, clenching his fists in frustration. "I could not save him." For the second time in a matter of minutes, Viridana's eyes widened as her head snapped to look at the man for the first time since the urn exited his pack. The man could not bear to look at her as he recounted what he had to say. "At death's door, he pleaded for me to relay the message to you. With a heart full of regret, he asked me to honor the avian's funeral rites so I can bring to you his and your mother's funeral urn that he recovered." He designated the porcelain pot between him and Viridana. The man exhaled to steel his nerves, and looked into Viridana's pearlescent eyes. "It might not amount to much coming from me, but your father never forgot his family. He still loved your mother, and he always talked about you." Unable to keep looking, he slumped on himself. "If things had not turned out this way, it would have been a pleasure to see you join us." Then, as she realized that even when she was alone, there was still someone that cared for her, even if he was absent. At that moment, the dance broke. No longer could she stop the tears. No longer was her voice stuck. No longer could she think of anything but the family she truly lost. Half falling, half throwing herself into the items, she let go well she hadn't since her infant years, crying rivers as she hugged close the urn and feathers for comfort. Prior to this, she was unable to cry, or have the opportunity to mourn, but now, she has the ability to do so. For now her parents were finally reunited with her, in a home she successfully kept, in a time she would not be at risk of being whisked away. Although she let go the feeling she bottled since her mother passed, through her sorrow, deep down, she was truly happy to have them back. Jeremiah McClaw looked at the poor pheasant girl he lent his breast to cry on. She was now sleeping peacefully in her bed, urn and feathers still clutched to her chest. The avian beast girl was completely exhausted after expelling years' worth of stress, anxiety, and sadness. Once she went unconscious in his arms, he gingerly put her in the bed in the next room. If he had to be honest, he also cried for a moment there, but she had a far deeper wound to heal, so he had to be the rock that saved her from the sea storm. Jeremiah went back to the main room of the treehouse to don his breastplate back. Once done, he sifted through his travel pack to take a pouch full of coins and the last letters his friend wrote for Viridana, before the quest that heralded his demise. He put them on the dinner table, picked his pack, then exited, as quietly as he could. The letters would answer questions she would undoubtedly have. She would probably have others, but for now he will rest too, and come back to talk in a few days once she finished mourning. As he walked through a suspended bridge, he stopped to look at the darkening sky. From midday to dusk, it took longer than he thought for her to calm down. Looking at the vivid colours of sunset, painting beautiful pastels on the trees, the song of evening wildlife creating a serene atmosphere in this picturesque city of nature. The first stars appearing in the night sky as it turned from light blue to dark, then black. The western edge fading in rainbow colours with the heavens shining down on the world. The natural beauty he saw was conducive to ponderation. So he found himself praying. "Dearest friend, I hope you have found peace. Your daughter forgave you, as she loves you still. May the winds of the afterlife carry you to fly amongst the stars." Looking to the sky once again, as it sets in the night scene, countless stars shining as if to answer his prayers. The guilt he carried like a weight on his shoulders for kilometers since his friend's death weeks ago was finally lifted.